Hello, this is Paul Johnson from Film Obsessive. Today, my guest is Deborah Correa. She's director of the new feature film, The War Between. It's a Western set in Arizona during the U.S. Civil War. And Deborah, welcome to Film Obsessive and congratulations on the completion of your first feature film.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for having me as well. I'm excited.
I'm excited to talk about your film, but I'm going to cede the floor to you to let you tell our viewers and readers just a little bit about the plot.
Sure. And I'll give some context before the plot as well, because the story takes place and starts from the most western battle of the Civil War, which took place near Tucson at Picacho Peak. And it's something I didn't know about until the writer and EP Ron told me about it. And I was like, this is fascinating. So the origin of the story starts there at that battle. And from there, it kind of goes into a more fictitious narrative. It's about a soldier from the north and a soldier from the south who are both stranded in the desert. They find each other and they have to get along to survive. They come across like different, obstacles and adventures as they get through it. But what I really loved about the script was how it resonates with today. And it's like lessons you can apply to the United States and life today.
And you're just back from Phoenix Film Festival, is that correct? Where the film had its premiere?
That's right. We premiered to a sold out crowd. It was a really great experience to premiere where we shot with the community support and with people who live there who didn't even know about the battle and that it was the setting for the most Western battle of the Civil War. And we were also the first film to get approved for the tax incentive and the new tax incentive in Arizona for shooting there. So it was like a big celebration. It was really fun to see all the crew and the cast came out and we had a great time.
That is really thrilling, and I'm happy it could premiere there. I'm just so intrigued by the film and the production largely taking place in the past, but in a very recognizable area of the US. And I'm just wondering a little bit if you could talk about your locations, props, settings, even just the buildings in the film are just so entirely convincing and persuasive.
Oh, thank you, Paul. Yeah. We had a very short amount of time for pre-production, but Film Tucson helped us to scout the locations. And then Tim Flood, our locations manager, he had a couple ideas of where we could shoot as well. So that came together fairly quickly. We went like a month and a half early before the shoot to do the location scout. And I remember just being like blown away by the different types of terrain. You have Four Y Ranch, which is very like grassy. Then you have like the actual Picacho Peak location, which is very mountainous with all the saguaro cactus. And we also were able to shoot at Old Mezcal Studios, which is a setting for old westerns back in the day. It was a lot of films were shot there, and right now they're trying to bring film back to it to revitalize it. But as a set, it was really cool because it feels very desolate. And the depot and that building, Butterfield Stage Depot, was a part of Mezcal Studios. And then we also got to shoot at Old Tucson. So we had like mostly exteriors, I would say, and then maybe 2 or 3 days with interiors.
How long did the entire shoot take?
We did it in 15 days.
You did it in 15 days. That is remarkably quick.
There
Efficient,
was,
perhaps.
I have to say, the trick of it was, I think, really how talented and great the two actors are, all the actors, but Damien Conrad Davis and Sam Bullington are the leads, and they would get it like by the third take. We'd be like, okay, we're ready to move on. But also my cinematographer, director of photography, Evan J. Cohen, he's my friend from Emerson. Like I met him at Emerson College. We were both in film school. And he was like, let's do as much on the boots on the ground prep as possible. So we took a whole entire week and we photoboarded as much as we could, especially the complicated scenes. We had storyboards for that, but we photoboarded how we're going to frame it, what angles we're going to use, what types of lenses, so that we kind of knew what we were going to do before we were there. Because there's so much open space, a lot of blocking you have to do in that open space. So I actually had surveyor flags and I would stick them where we were going to shoot which shot. It had to get that, granular with it. so we could be as efficient as possible. And there was like one of the locations, like they pulled our flags up, and I was like, oh my God, how are we going to do this? But we approached it with a more freestyle way and handheld, and it was fine. It worked out fine.
I'm thinking too, you're at the mercy of the elements out there in the exterior shots, the sun, wind. Were conditions harsh or difficult, or did you experience a relatively pleasant time there with your crew?
Well, it was funny because like we did our first day was the battle sequence, and it was the hottest day of that year. We're on this mountain. The guys are on horses wearing their wool, Civil War jackets. And we had to really deal with the heat and dehydration, make sure everybody had water. And that was very challenging. And doing the shoot at Picacho Peak was very hard, difficult, and hot, and very hot. But as we changed like different terrains, it became other reasons. Like the wind was a problem at 4Y. So like Apache Springs, when they meet, it was like this swirling wind, so sound was a giant issue. So it's constant. And then like we sometimes we're out in the middle of nowhere. We had walked quite a bit. We had to watch out for rattlesnakes. We found one rattlesnake that we had to like move, and that was challenging just because you're not close to any trailers or anything. You're just kind of out in the elements, and you rough it and you figure it out, and then you head back. But it kind of also makes you gel as a team more. You feel more united, like you're in this together. And I felt very supported by our Arizona crew. They were great. They did it with us. They were there with us through all the heat and the wind and the rattlesnakes.
It's a film that works in some ways in a pretty recognizable idiom, right? It looks and feels very much like a Western, albeit a Western set in the Civil War. But it's also a narrative that to me seems like it really turns midway through from a story of the soldiers to a story of the other people, including women, whose lives are impacted by their service.
Yes, I really see. Ron started with this very seed of a story that was about these two guys having to unite to survive. He had referenced, oh my gosh, now I can't remember the name of it. Lost in the Pacific, something in the Pacific. And it was from like, I want to say it was like from the 1950s. So I watched it, and it's about this Japanese soldier and American soldier who end up getting along to survive the island. And that was like this very, okay, I get this dynamic. I know we can make this film. It's small scale enough where we can probably self-finance and get it made. And then as he wrote it, it was like all of these layers of story came, and it's just so beautiful. And the character, there's different characters that you meet throughout the story and through flashback and through as they're on their journey. And it really excited me as a director to bring in like different textures, shooting with different types of lenses, using like distortion type things. And I feel like, I don't want to give too much of the story away, but I really wanted to have the female perspective through a character as well, not just my take as a director on the two men and like my perspective on war and visual Western, but also like the female characters and like how they would feel and what their journeys would be like in this kind of world back then too.
Yeah, I feel like that's an important and crucial element of the story. And one of the things I really love most about the movie is it's not, it looks and feels like a traditional Western in many ways, but it's simultaneously both that and more than that. Are you personally a fan of the genre?
I do love Westerns. I do. Well, I would watch them with my grandfather when I was little. And so like The Searchers, My Darling Clementine, older those epic big scope and then more artistic Westerns, like he watched all of them. So I got very close to that genre when I was young. And it also just like brings me back to those times with my grandfather watching movies. So it has a very special place in my heart. And Ron said something early on that I just totally resonated with. And he was like, Western is the most uniquely American genre other than film noir. And there's a lot to do with that because it can be Shakespearean in scope. You can really use it to tell big stories and the more like intimate microcosm of what's going on in history. And I feel like The War Between was a perfect example of that because you have the backdrop of the Civil War and then the story of these two guys trying to survive, but they're on opposite sides.
And it's a genre that critics at one point said had died in the 1960s, but if it did, it's been resuscitated and reinvigorated and reinvented in different ways by different directors like yourself in absolutely every decade since. And the visuals still really do pit the protagonists against the environment in ways that I think really no other genre, maybe save for science fiction, can.
That's a really good point. Yeah. And I think it was like we really wanted to approach it as a traditional Western visually so that you have the aesthetics that can speak to this relationship that I feel like a lot of Americans have with it. But then we were telling a more, I wouldn't call it subversive, but a more like progressive story within that structure. And Evan was, we did a camera test and he, we were figuring out which lenses we wanted to use. And he had these like vintage Russian Lomos, anamorphic lenses. And when we saw the backdrop of Picacho Peak on those lenses, we're like, oh my God, there's no this is what we're going for. That's what we're doing. It just looked like a painting, had a very artistic quality and some like, really textured flares. And we just fell in love with it, the look of it.
You know, you mentioned too that you had a tax incentive for filming. Is it the state of Arizona or is it in and around Tucson specifically?
It's the state of Arizona and it just passed. So that's how we were the first film to qualify for it. And they are really, they want to bring film to the state because there's just so many different types of terrains. And um, there's like a love for film there. They have the old movie sets and it was something that gave us like a morale boost as well as like the financial boost because the community really came together to support the film. And that was great. I mean, you can't really like replace that, right? It's like it was because we were near Tucson mostly. So Film Tucson was even helping us early on. But that's been extremely just like a morale boost and helping with everything, across the board, getting the word out. And
That is thrilling, and it's your first feature film as a director, right?
it's my dream come
Any
true.
Yeah, and I know you've directed for television. I know you've directed other kinds of work. You've mentioned documentary work. I'm just wondering, is there kind of a special feeling when you set out and start work on your first feature film, maybe on day one, and you're calling the shots on something you haven't called the shots on before?
Yeah, I mean, I've done a couple short films, which was great training ground. And also to build confidence to know that I can do it. And I just remember pinching myself being like, oh my God, I'm directing a feature. And I was so scared because it was such an ambitious thing to try to tell this story in 15 days. And all I could do is just put one foot in front of the other and just keep making decisions and moving forward. And as much prep as I could. So it was a dream come true. And I loved the experience of it. And it was like the actors were amazing once we found them, working with Evan. And the script was just something I felt very connected to. And I knew that we could tell this story. All of it was just a gift, it felt like for me.
I'd like to trace back just your own journey towards it a little bit. So you mentioned film school at Emerson. That's one stage along that path. And then is there other training as well?
Yeah. So I was accepted into the AFI directing workshop for women, which is like a incubator for directing a short. And that was a great experience just to kind of stretch your muscles. And even though the expectations are so like now that I look back and I'm like, oh, you're a little bit delusional thinking thinking that it was going to make your career, but it built towards it. It's every step has built towards this. And I feel like it gave me that like, oh, okay, I am a leader and I can do this and I'm a director, even though like I struggle with confidence and things like that. It's almost like you can see the artistic collaboration around you and the talent that people are bringing to the film too, and almost like it is like a true collaboration, and I got a lot of strength from that too. And I feel like AFI was just, you learn so fast. It's like, what do they say, drinking from a water hose or something? Like it was so much because it's hands-on and you do everything like you're at a studio from start to finish. And Hulu picked up that short that I did there. And I just liked, I was like in the middle of it being like, oh my God, I got into this program. I was so like blown away by that because I had just come to LA and it was like another like, wow, this is like actually happening. And it was something that I had heard about. I'm like, oh my God, if I can get into this program, that would be huge. And so it was cool. It was definitely a boost.
That's really exciting. And so The War Between just finished a run at Phoenix Film Festival. What's next for it and for you?
So we're doing the festival circuit with the film probably for the next 8 months. And Ron and we really had a great collaboration on this. He has written another script. It's a World War II story. It's another like lesser known part of our historical past. It's it's okay if I pitch it.
Please
It's
do.
okay, so it's the story of a Japanese internee American who helps a prisoner of war, a German prisoner of war, escape in the middle of Colorado. So there were prisoners of war camps that we shipped the Germans to during World War II, and they were right next to Japanese internment camps, and they both worked on the sugar beet fields in Colorado. So Ron has done extensive research and wrote this beautiful script. It's a love story, but it also shows kind of a darker part of our past that we don't know a lot about. And I kind of want to just take the time to like tell that story, maybe like with a little bit more financing and time.
Mhm.
And so that's like our next project. It's called Fall.
And you imagine that too will be a feature film?
Yes.
That
Yes.
that's the length and the scope that you are looking at. And I love that. And I'm thinking too, in terms of the comparison with the war between, and one of the things I love about that film is uh I used to always I used to teach a course in Westerns as a genre every year in my career, and I enjoyed it very much. And even though my students would frequently come in thinking, oh, these are the films my grandfather used to watch, they would quickly learn that the Westerns were not really just about the Old West, but they were about the times in which those films were made, whether they were the 1940s, whether they were the 1960s, or whether they were the 2010s, even. All of them were reflecting on that current moment. And boy, there's more than one time in more than one moment in the war between where I'm called upon to do exactly that and think about, these two men having grown up in very different circumstances and very different belief systems, to the point where they can really almost no longer imagine themselves to be part of the same country. And it's a thought that really resonates with me today. And just the prospect that you've described for your new project sounds like it will have that same kind of resonance and meaning with audiences,
Mhm.
looking at it through a contemporary angle.
Yeah, I love that. I love that analysis of it and how with the war between, having the Western as a backdrop to tell a story for today, that was big for us. And it kind of shows you how we really need to focus on our shared humanity, not the differences, because we all have our blind spots. And I think that, as you watch the film, there's little things throughout it that you can put towards like what's happening politically today and within our country.
I'm excited for it to gain a wider audience as it continues its path through film festivals over the next 8 months, and excited to see what comes up for you in the future, Deborah. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you, Paul. It was so great. Appreciate it.